You know that moment when you see an AI chatbot do something real, like book a flight for you or check your company's live inventory? Well, that magic isn't really coming from the AI model alone. Nope, it's all about how that AI connects to the outside world. And honestly, for years, that connection has been a total mess, a real Wild West of custom code. Today, we're going to dive into two open standards that are finally bringing some much needed order to that chaos. And believe me, they are transforming how AI agents get things done.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by looking at the core problem that trips up pretty much every AI developer. Then we'll get into the two really interesting but very different solutions that have emerged: the Model Context Protocol, or MCP, and agent skills. And then, the fun part, we'll see how they actually work together to create this super powerful strategy for building smarter, more capable AI. So first up, let's talk about a headache that I think every developer out there has felt. It's called the integration tax. It's that feeling you get every single time you want your AI to talk to a new service, whether it's Slack, GitHub, or just a simple database. You've got to go and build yet another custom connector from scratch. And this is what the industry calls the N times M problem. It sounds a little technical, but it's really simple. For every AI application you build, that's N, you need a totally custom connector for every single external tool it needs to talk to. That's M. So even if you only have a few apps and a few tools, you very, very quickly end up with this tangled web of custom code. It's just a maintenance nightmare, and it slows down any real innovation to a crawl.
So, to finally solve this mess, Anthropic came along in late 2024 and introduced this brilliant solution. It's a standard they called the Model Context Protocol, or MCP for short. And let me tell you, it completely changed the game.
At its heart, what MCP does is create a standardized language, a common ground for AIs to talk to the outside world. So instead of that crazy, messy N times M web of connections, you get a much, much simpler N plus M world. You just build one connector for your AI and one for your tool, and boom, they just work together.
And Anthropic came up with the absolute perfect analogy for this. They called MCP the USB-C for AI. And it's just so good because it perfectly captures the goal, right? To create one universal plug that lets any AI agent connect to any tool without needing a whole bag full of different adapters. Now, the architecture that makes all this work is actually really elegant and simple. It's broken down into three parts. First, you have the host. That's your AI app, the chatbot. Then, inside of it, you have a client that makes the secure one-to-one connection to a server, and that server just represents an external tool, like GitHub. This design, it gives you this really clean separation and a strong security boundary for every single connection. And MCP was a huge hit. I mean, it saw massive adoption from Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, pretty much everyone. But this brave new world of universal connectivity, well, it came with a couple of hidden costs. The first major cost that popped up was security. You see, by creating this standardized way for AIs to talk to the internet, MCP also, kind of by accident, created this huge new attack surface. Researchers pretty quickly identified a whole new class of really complex security risks. And these risks really fall into three main buckets. First, you've got your classic supply chain risks, where a tool you trust suddenly turns malicious. Then you've got your standard web security risks, like SQL injection, but now they're targeting these new MCP servers. And then there's the really interesting stuff, brand new AI-specific threats, like prompt injection, which are designed to trick the model into misusing its own tools. But security wasn't the only problem. There was also a really practical and expensive cost. You see, the way MCP works is by loading the descriptions for all of the available tools directly into the AI's context window, right at the start of a session. So if you connect to just a few complex services, you could burn through thousands of tokens and a big chunk of your budget before you've even asked a single question. So to deal with these issues, especially that token cost, Anthropic came out with a second complementary standard in October 2025, and they called it Agent Skills. Now, this wasn't a replacement for MCP, not at all. It was a whole new layer on top. So think of a skill not as a tool, but more like a recipe, or maybe a procedure manual for the AI. It's just a simple text file that encodes your organization's specific way of doing something, like a code review checklist or the steps for building a financial model. Okay, if there is one thing to take away from all this, it's this distinction right here. MCP, it gives an AI agent a kitchen full of utensils, right? It's the connection to GitHub, to Jira, to your database. It's the tools. But an agent skill, that's the recipe. It's the instructions that explain exactly how your team uses those utensils to, plan a sprint or run a report. So MCP answers the question, hey, what can you do? And skills answer, okay, but how should you do it? It's the tools versus the know-how.
And here's the really clever part. Here's how skills solve that big token problem from MCP. They use this technique called progressive disclosure. So at first, the agent only sees the name of the skill, just a little label. It's only when it actually decides to use that skill that it loads the full set of instructions into its context window. This keeps the agent's working memory super lean, super efficient, and way more cost-effective.
So you've probably figured this out by now. This isn't a competition. It's not MCP versus skills. No, the real power, the magic, happens when you combine that universal connectivity from MCP with the expert procedural knowledge from skills. I mean, when we put them side by side like this, it's just crystal clear that they are optimized for completely different jobs. MCP is all about external actions, it's got a strong but complex security model, high token costs, and yeah, you have to run a server. Skills, on the other hand, are for encoding knowledge, have almost no token cost, and are as easy to deploy as just dropping a text file into a folder. And this all leads us to a really simple framework for when to use each one. You use MCP anytime an agent needs to reach out and touch the outside world. You use agent skills to teach that agent your company's unique secret sauce, your processes, your best practices. And for the most powerful results, you use them together. You give the agent an MCP server so it can access Jira, and you give it an agent skill that teaches it your team's exact method for planning a sprint. So what does this all mean? What does this convergence of these two powerful standards really tell us about where agentic AI is headed? This quote from Block's Goose team really just says it all. The whole AI ecosystem is maturing. The debate is finally moving past these simple questions, like should an agent have tools or instructions? Now we're building sophisticated systems that just assume you need to intelligently combine both connectivity and knowledge. That's real progress. And that, I think, leaves us with the big question for the future. With standards like MCP, we've basically figured out how to give our agents hands, right? Hands to manipulate the digital world. And with agent skills, we're learning how to give them instruction manuals. But as these agents get more and more powerful and autonomous, the real challenge is going to be teaching them judgment. So now that we can connect them to everything, how do we teach them to be wise?